I was standing at my bathroom mirror, trying to decide if my earrings were too much for a casual dinner at my brother's house, when my phone lit up on the counter. It was my accountant. Marcus never texted me. In 4 years of working together, the man had called exactly twice, once when my father's estate paperwork was ready to sign, and once when the IRS flagged a discrepancy that turned out to be nothing. Marcus was a phone call person. Old school. The kind of man who thought texting was for teenagers and people with nothing important to say. So when I saw his name on the screen with a text message underneath it, something cold moved through me before I even read the words. Do not go to dinner tonight. Call me right now. Do not sign anything. I set down my earring. I read it again. The bathroom felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had shifted an inch closer without me noticing. I called him. He picked up on the first ring. Rachel. His voice had none of its usual warmth. Where are you right now? I'm at home. I was about to leave. Derek's dinner starts at 7. You cannot go to that dinner. I laughed, but it came out wrong. Too thin. Marcus, what is going on? I need you to sit down somewhere and listen to me carefully, he said. And I need you to promise me that when I tell you what I found, you will not call your brother, you will not send him a message, you will not let him know you know anything. Can you do that? My legs found the edge of my bed. I sat. Tell me, I said. He told me. It took him 22 minutes. By the end of it, I was staring at the wall of my bedroom, with my phone pressed so hard against my ear that it hurt, and I was thinking about every single moment over the past 3 months that had suddenly rearranged itself into something I didn't recognize. My father died in February. Pancreatic cancer. He was 61 years old, and he went from diagnosis to gone in 4 months, which is its own kind of cruelty, fast enough that you never quite believe it's real until it already is. He left behind a construction company he'd built from nothing over 30 years, a house in Connecticut, and 2 children, my brother Derek, who was 38, and me at 29. He also left behind a will. I knew what the will said because I had been there when he wrote it, sitting in his attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon while he was still well enough to make jokes. The company was to be split evenly 50% to Derek, 50% to me. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided the same way. There were a few smaller items, sentimental things, designated for specific people. But the core of it was simple. Half and half. Equal. That was how my father had always done things between us, even when Derek was furious about it, even when he argued that he'd put more years in, that he deserved more. My father had looked at him calmly and said, "She's my daughter too." That was 8 months before he got sick. After he died, Derek had been kind, attentive, even. He called me every few days. He handled a lot of the paperwork so I didn't have to. He was the one who reached out to my father's attorney, to the business's existing accountant, not Marcus, someone else, a man named Philip who had worked with the company for years. Derek said it made sense for him to coordinate everything since he was already working inside the business. I had a job I needed to get back to. I was grieving. I let him. That was my first mistake. Marcus had come into the picture 6 weeks ago, when I finally started asking questions about the estate timeline. My father's original attorney had retired unexpectedly health reasons, his office said, and the file had been transferred to a new firm. I didn't love that. So I hired Marcus independently to review everything before I signed the final transfer documents, just to have a second set of eyes. I told Derek and he'd said, "Of course, that's smart. Whatever makes you feel comfortable." He'd sounded so reasonable. Marcus had been quiet for weeks, methodical. He didn't call to check in often, and when he did, he said things like, "Still reviewing and being thorough," in a way that I found slightly annoying, but ultimately reassuring. He was being careful. What he had actually been doing was pulling at a thread, and the thread had unraveled something enormous. The documents Derek had prepared for my signature, the final estate transfer papers that were supposed to formalize my 50%, were not the documents my father had signed. Not exactly. They had been altered, subtly, precisely, in ways that would be easy to miss if you weren't looking for them and nearly impossible to prove without the kind of forensic document analysis that Marcus had quietly commissioned 3 weeks ago without telling me he was doing. The ownership split had been changed, not dramatically. That would have been too obvious. Instead, there were amendments buried in the language restructuring clauses, operational control provisions, a buyout trigger tied to a performance metric that had been retroactively defined in a way that I would never have met. On paper, I still owned 50%. In practice, if I had signed those documents, Derek would have had the legal mechanism to force a buyout of my shares at a valuation he controlled within 18 months for a fraction of what they were actually worth. My father's company was worth approximately $4.2 million. Under the documents Derek wanted me to sign, my forced buyout would have netted me somewhere around $180,000. Marcus had also found something else. The new attorney who had taken over my father's file after the retirement, his office address was a building in Hartford that Marcus had driven past on a hunch. The suite number on the letterhead didn't match any office in the building directory. When Marcus called the number, it forwarded to a cell phone that, after some digging, turned out to be registered to Nicole, Derek's wife. I sat on my bed for a long time after Marcus and I finished talking. The dinner invitation on my phone. Come at 7, we'll have wine, it'll be good to be together. It looked different now. Derek had been pushing me to sign before the end of the month. He'd mentioned it twice in the last week alone. The dinner was the close. I understood that now. The dinner was the moment when he would put the papers in front of me over a glass of wine, in the warm light of his dining room, surrounded by family, and I would feel guilty about the lawyer and the delays and the months of him handling everything alone, and I would sign. He had known me my whole life. He knew exactly how to do it. I didn't go to dinner. Instead, I sat on my couch in my coat with my earrings still off, and I thought about the things I had let myself not see. I thought about how Philip, the company's longtime accountant, had announced his retirement 2 weeks after my father died, how Derek had said it was a coincidence, these things happen, and had brought in a new firm almost immediately, how I had been so deep in grief that I hadn't asked why the transition felt so fast. I thought about the phone call 3 weeks ago, when my father's attorney told me the will file had been damaged during the office transition, and some documents would need to be reconstructed from secondary copies. I had thought it was strange. I had not thought it was orchestrated. I thought about my mother. She was 60 years old and she lived 40 minutes away, and she adored Derek in the specific way that mothers sometimes adore their firstborn sons, with a loyalty that was almost immune to evidence. She had been calling me lately, gently, asking when I was going to stop making things difficult. She didn't say it like that. She said it like, "Rachel, sweetheart, your brother is working so hard. Couldn't you just trust him?" I had assumed she was anxious about the estate dragging on. I had been patient with her. Now I was wondering what Derek had told her about why the transfer was delayed. I called Marcus back. "What do I do?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "you come to my office with everything you have, every email, every text, every voicemail. We're going to an attorney I trust, and then we're going to the authorities, because what your brother and his wife have done is not just a civil matter." "What do you mean?" "Forging estate documents, creating a fraudulent law firm to facilitate a transfer," Marcus said. With the careful flatness of a man who had been in finance for 30 years and rarely got emotional. "That is wire fraud, Rachel. That is potentially conspiracy. This is not a family dispute. This is a federal matter." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to Marcus's office with a folder I had spent 4 hours assembling every document Derek had sent me. Every email, screenshots of every text thread. Marcus had his own folder, thicker than mine. We went together to a real estate and estate litigation attorney named Patricia, who read through everything with the focused quiet of someone who was building something in their head as they went. When she finished, she looked up at me. "Your brother was very careful," she said, "but not careful enough." The forensic document analyst had flagged something that went beyond the altered language. The metadata embedded in the digital files. Derek had sent me the timestamps, the edit history. The author fields told a different story than the dates printed on the pages. The documents had been created in March, 3 weeks after my father died. Not before. They had been backdated. And the original template they'd been built from still existed in the file's hidden revision history, like a ghost that didn't know it was supposed to disappear. There was also the matter of a notary seal. 2 of the documents bore the seal and signature of a notary in Bridgeport. Patricia made a call. The notary had no record of ever notarizing those documents. She had never met my brother. Her seal number had been copied from a publicly filed document, something Derek had apparently found through property records and reproduced digitally with enough precision to pass a casual review. Patricia filed a complaint with the state's attorney's office that afternoon. I want to tell you that I felt something powerful in that moment. Righteous, maybe, clear. What I actually felt was tired and sad in a way that I hadn't expected, not for myself, but for the version of my brother I had believed in for 29 years. The one who had taught me to ride a bike in the driveway of our parents' house. The one who had sat with me in the hospital waiting room the night my father's diagnosis came in and held my hand without saying anything because there was nothing to say. That person had been real. I had not imagined him. I just hadn't known that he'd decided, somewhere along the way, that what he wanted mattered more than who I was to him. The investigation moved faster than I expected. These things sometimes do, Patricia told me. When the documentation is clean and the fraud is traceable, Marcus had preserved everything in a way that left very little room for interpretation. The forensic analysis was unambiguous. The fake law firm Michelle Nicole had set up using a registered agent service and a rented mailbox had a paper trail that led directly to her personal email account. It turned out Nicole had done most of the technical work. She was meticulous. She had a background in paralegal work from before they were married, and she had used that knowledge carefully. What she hadn't accounted for was that meticulous people leave meticulous records, and meticulous records are easier to trace, not harder. 3 weeks after I walked into Patricia's office, investigators paid a visit to the company's offices. Derek was in a meeting with a potential new client, a developer from New Haven, who was looking to contract out a significant renovation project, the kind of deal that would have been worth nearly $500,000 over 2 years. My brother had been working on it for months. It was, by all accounts, the biggest client he'd brought in since taking over day-to-day operations after my father got sick. He was in the middle of his presentation when they knocked on the conference room door. I did not find out about this in real time. Patricia called me that evening. "It's done," she said. I asked her what happened. She told me. And then she told me something I hadn't known, something that came out in the process of the investigators going through Derek's records. He had not acted alone, and Nicole had not been the only person who knew. Philip, the company's original accountant who had retired 2 weeks after my father died, had not retired voluntarily. Derek had paid him. Not much, $15,000, routed through a consulting invoice for services that were never rendered. Philip had signed a non-disclosure agreement that he apparently believed would protect him. It did not. Agreeing to conceal a financial fraud in exchange for payment is not the kind of thing an NDA covers. The thing that broke me open, in the quiet of my apartment that night, wasn't the money. It wasn't even the fraud. It was something Marcus found when he was doing the final reconciliation of the company's accounts. For the last 3 months, while Derek was handling everything, while he was being so helpful and so present and calling me every few days to check in, he had also been systematically moving my father's personal investment accounts separate from the business, accounts my father had maintained for decades, into a joint account structure that would have automatically transferred to Derek alone upon my signature of the estate documents. My father had left roughly $340,000 in those investment accounts. Derek had moved them without my knowledge, without my consent, in my father's name, using a power of attorney that had expired at the time of my father's death, and therefore had no legal standing whatsoever. He had done all of this while calling me every few days to ask how I was holding up. I don't know what to do with that kind of information when you receive it. I don't know where to put it inside yourself. I held it for a long time and I let myself feel it, really feel it, not push it away into something manageable, and it was enormous and terrible, and then, slowly, it became smaller. Not gone, just smaller. That is the only way I know how to describe it. My mother called me the night after the investigators went to Derek's office. She had heard from him, obviously. Her voice on the phone was the voice she used when she was frightened and trying not to show it. "Rachel," she said, "what have you done?" I had expected this call. I had rehearsed for it. I had even written down some notes so I wouldn't get derailed by the emotion of it. "Mom," I said carefully, "I need you to listen to me. Not to Derek's version of this, to the actual facts." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He says you hired people to go after him. He says you never trusted him after Dad died and you've been building a case for months." "I hired an accountant to review documents before I signed them," I said. "And that accountant found evidence of fraud. I didn't build anything. I just didn't look away when I found out what was there." Another silence. "He's my son," she said, and her voice broke on it. "I know," I said, "and I'm your daughter." She didn't have an answer for that. We stayed on the phone for a while without saying much. Eventually, she said she needed to go, and I said okay, and we hung up, and I sat very still in my kitchen for a long time. There are relationships that get broken in ways that eventually heal, and there are relationships that get broken in ways that change their shape permanently, not destroyed, exactly, but rearranged into something neither person fully recognizes. I didn't know yet which category my mother and I would fall into. I still don't know. What I know is that I showed up every Sunday to have coffee with her while the legal process played out, and sometimes she talked to me, and sometimes she sat across from me and looked at the table, and I kept showing up anyway. Derek and Nicole were charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery of legal documents. Philip was charged separately with concealment of fraud for financial gain. The cases moved through the system over the following months, with the slow, grinding momentum of legal processes that are well documented and difficult to contest. Derek hired a good attorney. Nicole hired an even better one. They tried, for a while, to argue that the document alterations had been a clerical error, a miscommunication between their attorney and the estate firm that had been mishandled during the transition. The forensic metadata made this argument difficult to sustain. The Shell law firm made it impossible. Nicole's personal email, which contained a thread between her and Derek from 6 days after my father's funeral, made it something worse than impossible. In that thread, Derek had written, "She trusts me. She's not going to look closely. We just need to get her signature before she starts asking questions." Nicole had responded, "Give her some time to grieve first, then close it." That email was read aloud in a courtroom. I was not in the room when it was read. My attorney advised me to stay away, and I took her advice. But Patricia told me about it afterward, with a kind of careful professionalism that didn't fully hide what she thought about it. Derek received 4 years. Nicole received 3 years and 8 months. Philip received 18 months, reduced for cooperation. The investment accounts my father had spent decades building were restored to the estate and distributed according to the actual will, the original, which Patricia's office had tracked down through the estate court's record system, where a properly filed copy had been sitting the entire time. My 50% of my father's company is worth approximately $2.1 million at current valuation. I am 29 years old and I work in marketing, and I have approximately 0 experience running a construction company. I know this. I hired a general manager with 30 years in the industry, a woman named Sylvia, who my father had actually known professionally and who turned out to share his philosophy about how a business should be run. I am learning. Some days I understand things clearly, and some days I sit in my father's old office and I look at the framed photo on his desk, the one of him and Derek and me at a job site when I was maybe 12, all of us in hard hats that were too big, grinning, and I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to feel. I feel a lot of things. Not all of them are simple. What I know is this. If I had gone to that dinner, I would have signed those papers. Derek knew me well enough to know that. He had counted on the warmth of the table and the wine and the accumulated weight of shared grief to make me stop thinking and just trust him. And part of me, even now, even knowing everything, understands exactly how it would have worked, because he was my brother and I had been trusting him since before I knew what trust meant. The thing about being betrayed by someone who loves you is that they use the love as the instrument. They know the precise shape of your soft places because they helped create them. Derek knew I felt guilty about not being as involved in the business as he was. He knew I deferred to him on practical matters because I always had. He knew that a dinner invitation after months of funeral and paperwork and grief would feel like relief. He just didn't know that Marcus texts when it matters. My father's attorney, the real one, not the shell, came out of retirement when Patricia reached out to him. His health, it turned out, had recovered significantly. He wasn't going back to full practice, but he made time to speak with me by phone, and the call lasted over an hour. He told me things about my father I hadn't known, small things, observations from their years of working together. He said my father had been very clear about the equal split, had in fact revised his will twice over the years to strengthen the language around it after Derek had raised the subject in ways that made him uncomfortable. "He knew your brother," the attorney said, not unkindly. "He loved him, but he knew him." I thought about that for a long time. My father built his company in a town where nobody expected him to succeed, with 2 children at home and a second mortgage and a single contract that barely kept the lights on for the first 2 years. He did it through 30 years of showing up and being honest and honoring his commitments, even when it was expensive to do so. He had built something real in the actual world that employed 23 people and had been trusted by clients for 3 decades. He left it to both of us. I am going to make sure it stays worth something. Marcus sent me a bottle of wine after everything was finalized. Not a fancy one. Marcus is not a fancy wine person. Just a decent red with a card that said, in his handwriting, "Always read what you sign. M." I put the card on my desk. There are days when I drive out to the job sites and walk the properties and listen to Sylvia explain things to me, and I think about how much of this I still don't know. There are days when I sit across from my mother at her kitchen table and we drink coffee and talk about nothing important. And slowly, she has started looking at me again instead of the table. There are days when I am overwhelmed by the gap between where I expected my life to be at 29 and where it actually is. Running a company I never planned to run in the aftermath of a betrayal I never planned to survive. But I am here. I am still standing in the house my father built. and I did not sign anything.